The song we're singing from Flaming Pie, the new CD by Paul McCartney. And Paul McCartney is my very special guest today. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Michael.
This has taken a while.
Many years, really. I promised you years and years ago, and I've finally come good.
That's right. In fact, I think it was Band on the Run when we did that. I was one of those folk on the sleeve, and the deal was that you would do an interview with me sometime in the future.
I know.
It's worth the wait. Is it Sir Paul or not?
Well, it is. It depends what you want to call me. You know, it's a sort of huge honour, and I love it. But I generally get called Paul McCartney still. I suppose it's because my professional name is... it wouldn't look right on a record, I don't think, you know. Flaming Pie by Sir Paul McCartney. Seems better. But, no, I think it's been misunderstood recently. Some people have been saying, oh, he just wants to be called Mr. Really what it was for me was, I'm still intrigued to find out whether you automatically lose the title of Mr. when you get the title of Sir. I'm looking into it as we speak. Because to me, the title of Mr. is sort of hard-earned, working class. You get it, you know, when you're 21. And I love it. I like it a lot. So I'd like to think that you could retain it and still be a Sir.
At the same time.
I don't know if it's allowed.
I think that's having a cake and eating it.
It might well be, in which case I'll have to... I still use it, I think. I have to be a rebel.
Did you ever imagine that it would be Sir Paul McCartney? I mean, was that an ambition when you were younger? Did you dream of that?
I think, you know, I've always had such a good imagination that I kind of dreamed of everything. Standing by the bus stop, reading Room at the Top, you know, and just sort of waiting for the sports car with the blonde to go past kind of thing. Yeah, I came from a place in Liverpool. The last house I lived at in Liverpool was called Allerton. And I did always think, Lord Allerton sounded great. But in truth, it was just my imagination running away with itself. I never actually thought it had happened in a million years.
What were the practical ambitions of that child in Liverpool, dreaming away at the bus stop? I mean, what did you want to be?
It involved money.
Did it?
Yeah, because I was, you know, raised mainly in a place called Speke, which was quite down at heel, and still is, actually. Because my mum was a midwife, so we'd always get moved to the frontiers of Liverpool, you know. The roads were not built. But I saw, in looking around at my neighbours, that the problem was money, that they always argued why they fell apart, why their kids had to go away, or something. Money was the big central problem. So I didn't know what it was I wanted to do. I didn't really think it'd be music, but I knew it had to involve money, so that at least if I got married, at least that part would be taken out of the equation. And then I might have a good marriage if I was lucky, but I wanted to remove that evil money problem, you know, that was going to wreck the marriage before you started.
So the lure of the music industry in those days for you then was what, fame and fortune, basically?
It was, absolutely.
It was exactly that.
And in fact, it's funny that it's changed. In fact, I'm not so sure it has, actually. I think we assume it's sort of changed. I think... when we started, no doubt about it, you know, it was to get out of having to do a job and commit ourselves to some sort of profession that was going to be like a millstone round. We all felt that. We all felt we wanted to be in something sort of a little less job-like. And it was to get fame and fortune, yes.
And yet in your case, an extraordinary mystery is that within this very small area where you were actually living... That two guys, Lennon and McCartney, will get together and write some of the greatest pop songs ever written. But more than that, change popular culture, create the Beatles, which was a phenomenon, the like of which you've never seen. It's a remarkable... also divine intervention involved, isn't there?
It's a very strange thing. And I'll tell you what also strange was national service, as you will recall,
yes, sir,
was the thing we were all looking at.
Yes.
I was certainly due to go in a couple of years, and John being older than me was, and Ringo being older than both of us put together. No. Was. But suddenly, talk about divine intervention, the national service stopped. And I maintain you wouldn't have had a Beatles had it been for the national service. We would have all just not been in the same area.
That's right.
In different... regiments or whatever.
Yeah.
And because Elvis, if you remember, went in the army, and we thought it ruined him anyway. You know, yes, sir. Yes, sir. He was calling everyone sir after that. You know, it was just, it seemed to tame him too much.
You might have the rebellious streak taken.
Yes, I think it did. And I think also, I don't think we would have met up again. four lads in Liverpool, I think, we would have gone our separate ways. So it is quite strange, really, that it happened in the way it did.
Now, all of this is set down in this very good book called Many Years From Now, which Barry Miles has written along with you. And it's your story, it's your side of the story. We'll talk about the reasons for doing the book in just a moment. But I'd like to talk to you now about the new piece of music that you've composed, which is this symphonic tone poem, I suppose, isn't it?
Well, it's always difficult to find a title because I don't know enough about the forms of... I don't like to call it classical music because it isn't. Classical to me suggests old, generally. So I call it orchestral, contemporary orchestral music. But, and I've totally lost the track.
What was the starting point of it?
The starting point of this thing was, as Sammy Kahn used to say, was the phone call.
That was always the most honest answer, wasn't it? Which came first, the music or the phone call?
It's exactly true. EMI rang me up, and I think they'd heard that I was sort of looking for a commission. After I'd done a thing called the Liverpool Oratorio, I'd found I enjoyed it. And it was a stretch. I love music, and I love different forms of music. So to work with an orchestra was something very different for me and exciting. So I was looking forward to doing it again, but I was waiting for a commission. And Richard Littleton of EMI wrote to me and said, would you like to do something for our 100th anniversary in 4 years' time, 97? And I said, yes. Because 4 years was never going to come. The time seemed so long ago. So I just said, yeah, immediately. I accepted his offer. And that was really the start of it.
What about the business of creating, though? Because you've got no formal music training at all. You don't read music. No. So how do you go about, then? Because it's different than just writing a little pop song, isn't it? I mean, it's a different
it really
canvas.
is. It's like writing a novel as opposed to a short story. I think they're both as hard to do. But how I went about it is I always visualise the end product. I imagine myself in the Albert Hall. I knew there was to be an orchestra and a chorus if I wanted it. So I imagine myself there. I've got the programme on my lap. And I look up, what do they do? What does this orchestra do? And I always just start there. So I thought, right, I'd like them to start with a bit of a bang this time. The last one wasn't. It sort of crept in. And I just imagine it from that. And I got a couple of ideas as to what I might want to do. One of them was that I'd go back in time. I'd go back to creation. So then I wanted a complete lack of artifice. So what I did was I stipulated that none of the musicians could finger their instruments. They could only use their bows in the case of the strings, or could sort of blow their trumpets like a bugle. They weren't allowed to finger. So I robbed them of their skills for the first couple of minutes. So I got little ideas like that, started putting those together and seeing if they worked. And once I was happy with that intro, then I thought, OK, well, now we'll give them back their skills. And it just developed like that. And along with that, I started to put together a couple of little piano sketches of melodies that might work into something. And then started to get a story, because the traditional way, as I learned as I went along, I'd say to people, well, what is a symphony? I'd go to the dictionary, look it up. That's my way of going. My dad had always said that, look it up, So I go there and it says something like a large-scale orchestral work. So, well, that was no help. Didn't give me any clues at all. So I just started to kind of make it up, and then I thought, well, I need a story, because I'm going to need a framework, because I haven't written a novel, as it were, ever before, really. And the last time I did something similar was with Carl Davis, who was a big help in the structure of it all. So if I was to do it on my own, I got a story. So I started messing around, looking at Celtic things, and I got this title, Standing Stone. And I thought, well, that's symbolic of something very long-lasting, and it's also quite mysterious. I don't know why I love standing stones or these megalithic. I don't know why I like all that stuff, but I do, and a lot of people do. Why do they look so magical with a bit of mist around them and in the middle of a field? So I started to just investigate that for my own fun. And it led me along a kind of Celtic route. And then in the middle of that, I realised I was Celtic, having an Irish mum who came over when she was 11 and a dad who was Liverpool Irish, with the family went back to Ireland. Traditional
Liverpool background, in a sense. The great. All right. So this bit's called Celebration. From it.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is just.
This is the end. Well, this is right at the end, where we've come from creation, the ball of fire spitting through space. We've come through the whole story, and the hero and the heroine are finally in love and are married, and this is sort of their love song.
Part of Standing Stone, Paul McCartney's latest work, which is to be heard at the Albert Hall on Tuesday.
Yes.
With full symphony orchestra, choir, and the whole works. And
Full Monty.
and the CD's been released as well a couple of weeks here. And you tell me it's number 2 here, number 1 in America.
That's right, yes.
Must be very satisfying.
It is great, yeah. Do you actually think, as we sit from New York to LA, Chicago to New Orleans, all those people...
That's right.
It's magic.
Let's talk then a little bit about this book many years from now, because you say in this book that it's a way of setting the record straight. What needed to be set straight?
Well, I think, when John and I and George and Ringo worked together, we thought of ourselves as very equal. That was the great thing in the group. If Ringo didn't like a song, he vetoed it. Seriously, and he would just say, I don't like it, and we just wouldn't do it. And everyone's... So that's how it was when we were working. Then when we split up, it became more of a concentration perhaps on Lennon and McCartney as being the writers in it. And then, obviously, when John's tragic death, it became very much naturally centred on John as the sort of spirit behind the Beatles, which, in many ways is quite right. But I think, unfortunately, some people tended to overdo that and assume he was the only thing in the Beatles in many ways, Well, I think for wit, he and Ringo were probably sort of the two wittiest, So I think really that it was a question of me thinking, well, I'd better stick it down now before the memory goes completely, which is going fast, even as we speak, it's ebbing away. And I'd better get with someone I know and can trust, like Barry Miles, who wrote the book, to actually just put forward my side of things, because it's the kind of thing that was starting to happen was, George Martin wrote a book called The Summer of Love, and he asked me to proofread it just to see if his memory was the same as mine. And he got to a song called Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, and he said, well, this was John's song completely. And John wrote this, very typical of John, da-da-da-da-da-da. So I had to ring him up. I said, George, no, it was John and I. I said, we sat down. I contributed half of the song. I remember clearly arriving at John's place, it's in the book here, where he had this little drawing that Julian, his son, had done. And across the top of it, in this very naive children's writing, was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. John said, what about that for a title? I said, fantastic. He said, well, come on, let's go upstairs and write it, which we did.
Just like that?
Just like that. Well, that was one of the beautiful things about our relationship. We hardly ever took more than 3 hours over a song.
Really?
And I don't remember ever having a dry session. The nearest it came was a song that ultimately was called Drive My Car. Yes. That I brought...
Norwegian Wood, that was the LP?
Pardon?
Norwegian Wood, the LP?
Yeah,
I think it was.
I'm trying to prove. I can't remember things. I was talking about the memory. Here we have it. But things like that, where it's almost a better story that John just wrote Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds himself, that it's attributed to LSD, etc., etc. All the little legends that have grown up about it. But unfortunately, it's just not true. That I was there and we had a great session because we loved the subject matter. It wasn't about LSD. Because otherwise it would have been called Litzwood, because the initials aren't LSD. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is more like, But it was made up, as were the sort of Paul is dead rumours. All these, the climate, as you remember, was sort of a bit crazy anyway. And once an American DJ got hold of this stuff. So I think with all these distortions that were beginning to happen, there's a kind of sort of revisionism was starting, I sensed. And I thought, well, look, I don't want to kind of put John down at all. I'm his biggest fan. I'm the last person to do that because I really feel very privileged and loved every second that we had together. Let's face it, Lennon McCartney, to be McCartney in the Lennon McCartney songwriting partnership was fantastic, as I say. But I thought it was time to set one or two little things straight, like that Lucy in the Sky thing. I said, okay, I arrived there. John would then say, picture yourself, because it was very, very John opening that, because it's very Lewis Carroll.
Yes.
Picture yourself.
Yes.
John and I both loved Alice. So it was kind of our starting point rather than LSD. Yes. It was more Alice in Wonderland, know. So we went through it. I came out with Newspaper Taxis. He'd parry with girl with the looking glass eyes. I'd come out back with kaleidoscope or whatever this. Cellophane, it's always been a favourite word of mine, that cellophane. But so that was basically the idea. So I thought, well, whether people believe me or the revisionism doesn't really matter to me, but I think I ought to get it down.
You're talking about we've got a song here from the very early days, just From Me to You. I mean, was that written in the same sort of way that you describe? As sort of
yes.
What was the genesis of that song?
Yes, it would... in the early days, John and I would literally take our two guitars and sit wherever we were. I seem to remember a bit of this was done on a tour coach, in a hotel room, often on the twin beds, with John just sitting on one of them, me on the other, and we'd be the afternoon when we'd done our sound check or whatever. We looked at the hall, and we had from now till the evening. And rather than go to the flicks or something, we'd sit down and we'd think, let's write a song. And we'd just trade off each other. And it was very magical because me being left-handed, I was like a mirror version of him. He could look at my guitar, I could look at his, and it was like looking in a mirror in many ways. It's quite strange, actually. But we could play off each other, and we knew each other so well, having come up in Liverpool together, started writing songs, having come through the whole Beatle thing together. And we could read each other, and we knew what each other was sort of going to think. Well, with From Me to You, we'd had a lot of these I love you, P.S. I love you, she loves you, please, please, me. We'd put a lot of that in it. So this was going to get all the I's and me's all in one thing. From me to you, which is a little kind of formula we were using. The pivotal thing I think about it was when we got to the middle. We always called them middle eighths, by the way, even with the 16 bars or 32 or just 3. They were middle eighths to us because we'd heard musicians saying it's the middle eight. And we didn't realise it was 8 bars. It just sounded like a great catchphrase to us. So when we reached the middle eight, it went to a different chord than one we'd used before. It was slightly more sophisticated. And I always remembered that moment in my own personal memory as being... wow, we're really developing now. We're moving away from the 3-chord songs. There's something more sophisticated about this.
All right. But let's hear that and then follow it with, I think, one of the greatest songs ever, popular song ever written, which you wrote. I think you could write that and die happy, couldn't you?
Well, you should do, really, yeah. But, there's just... I've often thought that, yeah, any one of them would be enough, really. But, you want to do more. I like doing it so much.
But that's everybody's favourite song, most people's favourite. And is it yours?
Well, it's done amazingly well. I do love it. I think the thing for me that I love about it was that I dreamed it.
Yeah, is this true that you actually...
it is.
It came to you in a dream?
Yeah, you'd always read about other composers or people and these magic things happened to them, but it never happened to me. I literally one morning just woke up and I had this song in my head and didn't know what it was. Happened to have a piano by my bed, so started just put some chords to it. And it took about 2 weeks going around all my friends saying, what is this song? I can't have written it. It just came to me, So when people say to me, do you believe in magic? Do you believe in fate and all this sort of mystery? I say, yeah, I do, partly because of that song. I mean, not only did I dream it, it's been my most successful. So it suggests to me that there's more out there than we know about.
It's not only been your most successful, it's probably the most successful song of all time. It's just going out for its 7 millionth play in America. Somebody worked out with more time than you or I have that when it reached 6 million, it would have taken you 23 and a half years continuous play to listen to it. Those absurd facts of life, really. I suppose. Talking about, you're talking earlier about the Beatles, and that song, in fact, wasn't released as a single because of this Beatles thing, wasn't it?
Yes.
The corporate thing that you had.
That's right. We were a rock and roll group. We felt that we were a sort of R&B combo, and that it wouldn't be seemly for us to release a ballad. Also, it's a solo record, and I didn't want to emerge from the Beatles as a solo act. It was a very democratic group, the Beatles.
But how do you get from that democracy and that spirit to a situation where you had this acrimonious bust-up? I mean, what was it? Was there an inevitability about it?
No, well, yeah, I think that too. But I think it was business. It was money, that old thing that we started the interview with, really, Whereas it's wrecked millions of marriages, I suppose it wrecked this one. We used to play Monopoly, and I was never very good at Monopoly. I never really enjoyed it. I'd get a little bit too wound up in the middle of it. Some people could just play it, and it was a game. I always got a bit intense. So when it came to the real thing, and this was real money now, I got ever so intense. And it fell to me to kind of save our fortune, because we had an American bloke came in. Alan Klein. And it appeared to me that he was going to have it. And I think if I hadn't have done anything, I think he would have. In the first year, he had a fairly hefty management fee. And we had all sorts of rows, about, I was saying he'll take 15%, and the other guys, John mainly was kind of besotted with him. He'd got in via Yoko, who John was incredibly besotted with, and good luck to him too. But it had brought in Alan Klein because he'd promised her the world. It was really how it happened. So I knew I had to kind of do something, and in the end, I had to actually sue to get out of this thing. I said, well, look, can I just have my bit of the ball, please, and can I just leave the pitch? They said, no, you can't do that. We're all tied in and so on. So it was put to me that I'd have to sue someone. So I said, well, Alan Klein. They said, no, unfortunately, he's not party to any of the agreements. It's the others you'll have to sue. So it was probably one of the worst moments in my life.
Reliving it in the book, it comes across as that. And you said that when the Beatles split, that it was like a bereavement for you.
It was very difficult for me, yeah. It was my whole life, I think. I think the others, in their minds, I think John was lucky because he'd got this new direction now with Yoko. I think John all his life had wanted to cut loose. He'd been an art student. He'd sort of buckled down a bit for the Beatles because it was democratic. And I think he wanted to cut loose. He wanted to do all these things he'd read about artists in books doing. And I think Yoko gave him that opportunity. And a lot of what they did together was very fine stuff. But I think when it came to the Beatles, it meant that he kind of had to leave the group. He couldn't do it within the group. So, it was very difficult for me.
And then what was sad too was the way that it drove a wedge between your relationship, John, and was it always a spiky relationship, though? I mean, you said you loved him, and that love comes through in the book. Did he love you?
Yeah, I don't think it was... Yeah, I think he did, actually.
Did he?
We'll check. Just excuse me for a moment. John, come on, baby, did he? Yes. No, I think he did, yeah. It wasn't actually a spiky relationship at all. It was very warm, very close, and very loving, I think. All the Beatles. We used to say, I think we were amongst the first sort of men to come out openly, because you remember, it was quite strange in those days. We're talking about a long time ago now, and homosexuality was still sort of largely illegal. Sure. We used to say, I love him, on interviews. And the interviewers would get slightly taken aback if a man saying he loves him. And I think, quite genuinely, I think we really did, and I still do. But the business thing came right in the middle of it, and the lawyers came along with the business thing. And I talked to John many years later, because the great saving grace was we did put our relationship back together.
You did, I mean, that's...
Thank God for that, because I don't know what I'd do now with him gone if we hadn't. I think I would be sort of racked with all sorts of guilt. But we did. And in chatting to him, he said, one of the first things he said when we met after the breakup, when things had calmed down, he said, do they try and put you against me like they put me against you? Do they try and do that? I said, by golly, they do. He said, yes, that's good. Good to know. He said, because they're always trying to pit me against you. But we did put our relationship back together, and it was lovely, because we ended up, the last couple of years of his life, when he just had Sean, we could now talk about babies.
Because he didn't know how to handle kids, did he?
It was one of the saddest things. We once went on a holiday, and Julian was along, his first son. And the kind of family I'm from in Liverpool, there was always babies. You've been thrown a baby to jiggle on your knee. It wasn't anything precious. It wasn't an ice object. It was... Oh, all right, you just got slung a baby, and we were very tactile, I think, my family. I always imagine it like a bit of an Italian kind of thing. Mamma mia, everyone was all this sort of thing. John didn't know that, and I didn't realise any of that till much later in our relationship. We didn't talk about it. You don't talk about that stuff when you're teenage and you're in a group. It's later and I discovered sort of a lot of reasons for John's behaviour much later in our relationship. But we were on this holiday, and I would be bored with the adults, because, they're just sitting around getting drunk or whatever, which was fun for a while. But I'd get bored, so I'd go off with Julian, and we would be on a boat, and I'd be like, OK, now, I'm a pirate, and you're just an Indian, and I'm going to get you. Okay. And I'd just go into the fantasy world, and he'd go, okay. And so the two of us would be running around this boat and stuff with all the adults and next door, you know. And John saw this once, and he came up to me. He said, how do you do that? And I felt like crying, you know. It was like, God, you know, I can't tell you. It's just years of having babies thrown at me, or being a kid, or playing with kids, or having, you know, I had no kids of my own at the time. But it was just something my family taught you. Whereas his, with his dad leaving home when he was 3, and his mum not living with him. And because it was very strange. So I would go with him to visit his mum, who was living with a second husband, and had a new family. And John lived with his auntie. So John, I would be John's moral support. When we'd go together, we'd see his mum, and he idolised his mum. But then again, she got knocked over by an off-duty policeman who was a learner driver or something. It was terrible, tragic stuff. So to me, I was just very, very fortunate to have this sort of rather stable, warm Liverpool family. And in talking to John later, he had none of that. So he had to fend for himself. So that was the basis of John's acerbic wit.
Yes.
He was always having to use it.
Yes, and no, I was going to say, it was interesting, wasn't it? Because that was when we talked earlier about the revisionism. I mean, that really was what it was. It was John, the acerbic loner, the wit, and you were the Mr. Nice Guy, you know, the soft cop, hard cop routine in a sense. It was.
I think so. Yeah. Although in reality, that was our sort of public persona. I think in reality, we were actually both quite sort of hard cookies. Really, or he could be very, very sentimental. John.
I mean, you obviously were hard cookies. I mean, John, of course, was sadly murdered. But I mean, I think one of the most sort of extraordinary things, reading this book as well, is how you survived. I mean, and I just mean survived intact, because nobody reasonably intact, well, like most of us, but nobody could. You see, this thing about the Beatles is quite phenomenal in the sense that nobody's ever been through what you went through. There's one lovely story in the book which just tell us about when your daughter said to me, "You're Paul McCartney, aren't you?" I mean, what do you say to that?
That's right. We were in Scotland and they were little, and you know they'd only seen me as Dad, as you would, but they started to sort of be watching telly or looking at a newspaper or something, and I think they saw me on telly somewhere. And she was just going along, she said, "You're Paul McCartney, aren't you?" It was like, well, yes, but I'm Daddy to you, you know. It is very strange, that, but I say that's one of the good things about having brought the kids up in a reasonably level-headed way. And that was one of the reasons Linda and I wanted them to go to state schools. Because we thought, well, there's fame in the picture. You can't get rid of that. You know, even if it's, I want to be alone. Yeah. You're not left alone. You know, Miss Bridget Bardot, she may not be doing films, but she's still, you can't get rid of that.
Terrible punishment, that is self-inflicted punishment. That
you can't get rid of that.
You can't be a hermit.
So, you know, I just sort of felt that it would be good for them to go through a normal kind of upbringing. And so they got all those knocks early. They got, you know, they'd be in the playground, someone would be singing, "Mal, the can time," but McCart horse and all that. But that's what I had to put up with, you know, all the names and all that stuff. But I feel like it strengthens you. And so now, you know, they're pretty level-headed kids, touch wood. And they've got time for people. They're not snobs, which Linda and I value quite highly.
Let's have some more music now. Let's actually go to where we came in, which is Wings. And Band on the Run.
Our album.
Our album, the one we made together. Let's have the title track. Band on the Run, Wings.
Our song.
Our song.
Yes, our record.
Having written this book, and it's a tome. I mean, and
I didn't write it. I just did interviews. Barry wrote it. Really,
But I mean, it's all about you, but I mean, it's not all about you, really. I mean, there's a lot more still to come. But does it, to relive it all again, does it make any kind of sense to you? I mean, there's a mystery at the centre of it all, isn't there? As we said earlier, I mean, you and John in that area coming together, creating this extraordinary team. Have you come to any conclusions about it at all?
Not really, no. I'm not a great analyst. I kind of just count my blessings, I feel very lucky. And there is so much fate involved. My friend Ivan Vaughan taking me to Walton Village Fete, me seeing John there, me not going home immediately, me going backstage, talking to him, me happening to know the words to 20 Flight Rock, him happening to be impressed. There's so much sort of... Conclusions, no. I don't ask me about conclusions about life. Never mind the Beatles' career or that aspect of it. I find it very difficult to draw conclusions about anything. It just seems to me to be one great magical adventure, if you're lucky,
Certain things, of course, change your perceptions. I mean, Linda recently has been very ill. I mean, I imagine that would change your perception of life as well.
Yes, it does a lot. It's when you have a life-threatening illness, afflict your family, I think it does... put your priorities in place. You start thinking, oh, maybe I don't need to do that. Maybe we could do that together. We could do this, and it makes you realise, there's, as somebody said, nobody getting out of this one alive. Because I live as if I'm going to live forever. There's no sort of thought for the future in my mind. Maybe that's a good thing. But I think with something like that, you do have to sit down and you think, okay, what's important? Well, you're important to me, I'm important to her. And I think in some ways there is a good side to it. That's the good side to it. Obviously, all the rest of it is horrible.
Yes.
But she's doing well, and she's a very, very positive woman.
Yes.
Very can sort of laugh through all this. I'd say to her, I don't know if it happened to me, I'm not so sure I'd be that positive. But she's fantastic. She's a great, strong woman. She's my girlfriend. I know it's a bit like you and Mary. We just got lucky with each other, I think.
It is luck, isn't it?
Well, I think so. It's a... I mean, had I not have been at the Bag of Nails one night, my little watering hole... late one night, we would have never met, and had I not have actually stood up as she was about to leave and actually stood in her way and said, we're going to another club, would you like to join us? Which I never did, but I just felt I had to do it on this occasion, and luckily she said yeah. So that was over 28 years ago, and we've been very lucky.
And it's difficult, isn't it, to imagine any life without it?
Absolutely,
that's the thing about it. That if you contemplate a scenario ahead, it always includes that person. That you can't think.
It does.
What might it be like without that?
Yes, for me, there are some people who get married and spend a lot of time apart. I mean, for me, just sleeping with a fine wife is very much part of it.
Has to be with a lady too.
And sleeping with a lady. Now look at that. Well, I tell you, that is one of the fun things. Actually,
now, do you ever think when you're in speak, you end up sleeping with a lady?
Oh my God! I wished. I never thought it'd happen.
What about just a couple of other things to clear up before we play our final piece of music? Sadly, the Institute of Performing Arts, this thing you started in Liverpool.
Yes.
That seems to have taken off rather well.
Well, that's great. It was the old grammar school that me and George Harrison went to. So while we were at it, it wasn't our most favourite place, because it was school and we were teenagers in Liverpool.